All right, welcome back. We are live for week 2. Pretty excited to have everyone back. I appreciate everyone who is returning. And then for those of you, though, that this is the first time, thank you. I'm Leo Das, CEO of Group 337. We also are the people behind Inside Access Control, Inside Visitor Management, and more to come on that side. This is Getting Back to Work. It's in collaboration with Openpath. The intent and the idea behind this is a weekly, think of it as a live newsletter, is the best way that I like to approach it, where we discuss topics and articles that we see across the internet and the marketplace that are pertinent to access control and getting back to work. Ton of information out in the marketplace, somewhat hard to know exactly sort of what to do, what to read. So we try to summarize it. And on Thursdays, 3 o'clock, we do this. And then the next day, Friday, we bring the newsletter actually out. So again, thank you for doing it. So week 2, thanks to Openpath. Thank you for joining. So this week, like last week's were themed a bit. This week, we're going to do a little bit about the same thing as well. I picked 3 articles, one from Wharton, another one from Fortune, and another article from the World Economic Forum. So I'll jump into them. So the first one was an article called the Post-COVID Workplace, Will Employees Be Safe? So it was a conversation by a Wharton. It's this group called Knowledge that puts these out. And it's really this idea around what are people going to do when they come back and how are they going to feel? Will they actually be safe? And what is interesting on our end is that historically it's been about being safe physically. A lot of this is health and mental now that are going to have impacts on our systems and the way that they're used and the expectations that they have. So some data that came out of this. In the middle of it, actually, there's a great video where they talk to a teacher that is a professor in this space. So I highly recommend it. It'll be in the newsletter, like we said, tomorrow, and we'll add it to the show notes actually when we post this. But so the remote work people are going to come back, and the belief is because there's a sense of coming to an office for a lot of people that is around feeling normal, where currently right now nothing is normal. I mean, even for those of us that have been working out of your house for a while, like for myself, I'm working actually right now out of my parents' house. In Florida, we drove down and trying to make this work. If I could show you the setup that we have here, this is not normal at all, but there's a sense of wanting to get back to that normal. So they're going to do that. They've asked, how do we deal with people who are afraid to come back to the office and the facility? So if you think about that now, there's actually people, like you said, aren't going to want to go back to it. So what do you do with folks that are that way? I was speaking to someone earlier this morning, and really this shift around the workplace being an extension of where they work, which is now out of people's houses. So instead, before, where everyone sort of had a home, this idea that the new normal is it's an extension that people go to the office when they want to, and they leave and they go to their house and they work out of there as the new normal. So if you think about how does the access needs need to shift there, the visibility of the data that goes with that, cleanliness, things like that, that it's more of just not a binary case now. It's very dynamic. So thinking about that, there's also conversations that they had in here around this idea of a workplace full of emotion. So you're going to have different people at different levels of a comfort, if you would. So trigger points on things that happen. And it makes me think about the way that our systems that are being implemented now, how they interact. So you'll hear me talk a lot about access care, which is a topic that we've been discussing, and really also about so now what aspect of our systems that we put in. And this idea that if you have people that are highly emotional and worried already, if they're having to come to an office where they do a thermal scan, or there's barriers now where they have to fill out information on an app before they come in, although technically a good idea, how are you going to deal with a bunch of people that are at different levels of care and feel and that? So how are the people that are physically going to be there as the security guards, if you say, or the concierge, going to need to take that data point, and really just having a screen up that says you don't have a mask on, that may trigger some people, as we've seen, right? So whole new workflows and thought process. So they talk about that. There was a conversation which I thought was actually really interesting, and I highly recommend that you have conversations internally, is that will the new way that we work in the office, will there actually be greater productivity? If you think about, people are busier now from what I've been seeing and talking to and myself, but are you more productive? And so what does that mean with the space? So this idea that do you go to the office to be more productive? Do you not? So just thinking about that, how can you use the space to be more productive? I thought that was interesting. There is the belief that their productivity will increase, and it's going to be because the cognitive process change, which again, I haven't fully digested what all that means, but this idea that the way we work has changed now cognitively in the brain and how we interact with work, that we need to now think about that, whether it's the textures and feel of the desk, the tools that are there, the way our systems interact. I don't believe, I guess the summary to me of why I found this about interesting was applying old tactics and old thoughts to the new, which is now, I don't think is going to work for us. So a lot of the use cases that we've had before when we built products and systems and implemented them, and maybe in a lot of cases they were purchased off of that, the specifications have changed and how they should function. So really understanding that and digging into it, which leads to another article, which we'll get to, of having different stakeholders into the meeting, I think is important. So they also talk about the setting proper expectations, as it won't be the same for everybody. We talked a little bit about that. I think that's, again, very important. There's different rules that need to be placed into place. So the other thing is this idea they talked about, presenteeism, which is this idea that you have to be present all the time in order, like there's an unsaid rule, or maybe in some cases a said rule, about having to be present. That's now shifted completely. So really taking a look at that. And ultimately what hit me the most was this idea of making a more empathetic workplace. And it's not just going to be done based off of having lunches or offering services. I think it's also the way that the built environment works, and it makes you feel, and whether you're welcomed, is it the difference between if somebody isn't wearing a mask, that there's a big sign that says no mask with a red circle, an X through it, versus a more empathetic conversation with somebody around what that means, and maybe being able to pull them aside and having a conversation. I don't know. But it's the ideas around it. So great article by the Wharton at the Knowledge Center, the post-COVID workplace with employees being safe. We'll post that and put that on there. The second one that we found that we really liked was by Erica Fry, from Fortune. Is it time for your business to hire a chief public health officer? Going off of this idea of now having new data points, this idea around, in the conversation that they had, was around having chief public health officers. I found interesting because as we build our systems and we've been specifying, and you look at who are the stakeholders, there really hasn't really been a public health officer in the implementation of our systems. But now, if you're thinking you go beyond health, you actually probably should have had that when it comes to, say, schools. Probably not a bad practice to have that skill set with you. And maybe this is an area where you could have public-private relationships. John Healy, who we posted a podcast last week that we had with him, he talked about public-private and different relationships, that we don't have to act like the experts around public health. There are people out there that do. And everything from epidemiology and infection control and understanding that, data points around that, super important, right? But I don't know anybody that has an epidemiology degree working at a lot of access control companies or on a lot of the companies that we interact with and sell our products. So if I'm a developer bringing this in, how does that interact with the decisions that I'm making? So Erica recommended understanding that, having someone that does, how to manage through it, how to develop reliable models, which I thought was interesting, because again, I think that goes back to consistency and experience, which ultimately is driving trust, which again is an underpinning of all of these products in the relationship, is going to be on the trust side. Making science-based decisions, again, very important, I believe, on this case. What I thought was interesting on the chief public health officer and how this also relates to that you see with this, the social side of things that are happening now too, was having somebody that is preserving, promoting, and protecting health and wellness. So beyond just the HR department, somebody with a degree or an understanding in public health can help with the preservation, promotion, and protection of health and wellness. That ultimately, again, comes down to trust. So great article, really liked it. It had a lot of good details and made you really think and try to have a higher level conversation around this. The other one that we saw was how startups see the future of remote work. This was by Theris A.G. Wood, who's a writer, and this was in the World Economic Forum. Another good resource of information and critically thinking and conversation that you'd have there. This was a study based out of the UK, and they looked at, from a startup's point of view, how people saw the future of work. You hear a lot from a lot of big companies. They went and said, how are some of these companies that are looking to disrupt, if you would, or apply different technologies or different thoughts to the actual way we work, and had a ton of data. So things that came back were 3 to 5 days of remote work a week with dedicated days in the office. Again, back to the conversation about employees being safe in the thoughts. So I only need to be told things like 3-5 times before they become sort of facts and truth, and everything is starting to state that that is really how people are going to work, which is interesting. Work hours that have increased, but again, back to this idea of not knowing if they're productive. So I think what you're going to see on that end too are the implementation of HR tools, and I think access control systems of understanding people and time and space where they're spending it is going to come into that data set to create outputs for people to make good decisions. I think if you look at, they said 92% want the option to work from home. That's a lot of people. People do not miss the commute. I'm not surprised on that end, but it does shape the way that buildings are made and the thoughts that they're used. And I don't know, do you start to look where maybe you're starting to see people in the suburbs, they're saying, move out to that area, and the ability for them to get to spaces where they could have collaborative, again, because people want that. So if you look at all the different articles that we talked about, we start to map what people want. It really starts to create this idea where you have flexible policies, flexible buildings, flexible spaces. People can make decisions on when they want to come and when they want to go. There's a cleanliness and a trust creation that happens around that. And these places need to be dynamic. I also think it's important that these systems are able to talk, if you would, in a way, right? And communicate so that you can have it. Systems that are legacy that we've had, which are built to be siloed, are now being forced to have conversations and share data that we historically haven't had to do before, that we're now going to have to do so that people can start to have relationships and conversations. So I find that pretty interesting. And they summarize it where work life has changed forever. And I think that's a pretty obvious statement of how things have happened. So again, great article from the World Economic Forum. We'll put them in the show links. If you have questions, please post them here. If not, we'll continue to go, and we'll answer them later. So I think if you to summarize the three of those, where last week there was really a conversation around care and how people are feeling, again, still being brought through these to where people are having that how you feel conversation, which is interesting to me because it really gets into the emotions of we're a technology-driven industry with our customer base being very much a solutions-based. They want a solution. That I'm not sure that the current talk track of how we're doing it is actually going to be supporting those feelings. Bert just put on here, that's absolutely right. And having the ability to have storytelling and conversations around how our systems have feelings, if you would, or how they help in the feelings, I think is going to be pretty important. So really spending some time to think about the emotional side of what our systems either support or create, I think is important. So if you're starting to see conversations like around the thermal imaging, if you're seeing things around applications that are sent out before or barriers, I do think it's important to then say, okay, so how could this go bad, and have that conversation, and then what good does it create? And start seeing that in a lot of the messaging and communication. And if I'm on a buyer side, I'm going to start asking the questions around that as well. So help me understand how your systems could build trust with the people that are coming to my building. I think is important. And I think those in our industry that can answer that simple question, how are these systems that you have going to build trust with the people that interact with my space, are the ones that are going to win. So I'll leave it at that. Again, I want to thank Openpath for supporting this effort and this opportunity to create a conversation. They had a big day today where they've announced the raise that they had recently. So please check out that news. We posted something on this morning. Again, tomorrow the newsletter will go out. Please subscribe to it. It'll be dropped in there. There'll be some more information as well as a copy of this. It's viral, so please send this out to people as well. And with that, have a good and safe rest of the weekend, and thanks for joining.